Is everybody ready?
We are ready.
Alrighty.
Great.
So, welcome to Unchained Disciples. We're on our series Seeking Wholeness, finishing out our series Seeking Wholeness, and we're going to be looking at the topic Why does God allow suffering? A common question, one of the top search questions. Why does God allow suffering? It's a challenging question, and we're going to be digging into it. I'll start off by reading Romans 5 3 through 5. Romans chapter 5, verses 3 through 5. It says, "And not only this, but we also celebrate in our tribulations, knowing that tribulation brings about perseverance, and perseverance, proven character, and proven character, hope. And hope does not disappoint, because the love of God has been poured out within our hearts through the Holy Spirit who was given to us." So it says we celebrate in our tribulation. Our tribulation gives us perseverance. Perseverance improves our character, and our good character gives us hope, and that our hope does not disappoint. So who here celebrates in their tribulation?
I try, but I don't always succeed.
Yes. I don't know if I've tried to celebrate I try to celebrate during my tribulation, but not the tribulation itself. But
Brother Michael, may I make a question?
yes.
What is the meaning of tribulation? Is that suffering resulting from from our work for the gospel, or is that any kind of suffering?
Okay. Good question. Good question. Yeah, so I know there are a couple of areas we're going to look at where Paul is
Okay.
specifically talking about suffering for the gospel, suffering for Jesus' sake. Here, I didn't actually fully look at the context. I think this is actually talking about suffering in general, but I'm not actually sure. But yeah, so this in this verse, tribulation may be talking about either, but in general, we're going to be talking about suffering in general, any type of suffering, whether it's from a natural disaster, whether it's from you stub your toe on a table because it was dark, whether it was whatever, all types of suffering. You know, you got a piece of corn stuck in your teeth. We're talking about suffering that we do in life, and why does God allow it? And so, why does God allow suffering? Why do good things happen to bad people? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why does evil exist? These are some of the challenging questions that we have in life, and I'll attempt to address them. You know, these questions come up when you lose a spouse, when you lose a child, when you lose a parent, when you get a medical diagnosis, maybe cancer, when someone cheats on you or you get divorced, when you lose your job or you lose your money, well, these questions come up. You know, why is God allowing this? Why is God allowing this? And I know it came up for me when my mother passed away. My mother passed away. She was in her late 60s, and she was on the deaconess board. She had even written some of the sermons for the pastors. You know, she had been a stay-at-home mom. She gave up her career to raise us, grew us up in the church. You know, like, why did she have to die? You know, why did she have to suffer? And so, like, you know, those are tough questions to answer, tough questions to ask. You know, a lot of times when these are the questions that a lot of times make people lose their faith in God. So a lot of people have turned away from Christianity because of this question, because of suffering. So we're going to examine this. We're going to examine it both theologically and practically. We're going to take from a theological look and from a practical look. So our outline for today, I'll put it up. That was our introduction. Then we will go over our traits of wholeness. We'll examine the question itself. Why does God allow suffering? So first we'll just examine that question in itself. Then we'll talk about preventing suffering. We'll talk about the theological or philosophical views on suffering and evil. We'll talk about practical views on why the bad things happen. talk about something called the region beta paradox and reasons we go through trials from God, and then the conclusion. So that's the outline for our lesson. Any thoughts or comments or questions? No. Okay, so we're good. All right, so our traits of wholeness. So we're in a series called Seeking Wholeness, and I think this may be the last installment of Seeking Wholeness. I mean, this is going to be, I think, a two-part lesson, though, But this, why does God allow suffering, may close out this Seeking Wholeness series. Seeking Wholeness is looking at how to be spiritually, emotionally, and mentally healthy. We want to be free of oppression from the past, from ourselves, from bad thinking, from strongholds, and from the enemy. So we're going to talk about dealing with life's current stresses and also how to be healed from wounds and experiences from the past. We're supposed to have eternal life, but we're also supposed to have joy, peace, patience, and self-control while we're here on earth. So we've identified some traits that we're striving for that we've called the traits of wholeness. And those traits include authenticity, honesty, kindness, not seeking external approval and validation, setting boundaries, taking ownership of our responsibilities, living with purpose and passion, optimism, confidence, having healthy relations with others, not losing control of our emotions, being free from our addictions, addressing conflict with truth and love, being vulnerable, not being critical or judgmental, not being jealous of others, forgiving those who've wronged us in the past, knowing that we're worthy of receiving love, not being afraid to fail, being able to manage irrational fear, worry, and anxiety, having selfless encounters with others, not manipulating others, trying to control their actions and reactions, care about how other people feel, being patient, not giving in to social pressure and peer pressure. We want to be able to communicate directly. We don't want to take responsibility for other people's emotions, and we don't want them to take responsibility for ours. We want to be slow to anger. We want the ability to maturely express our wants, needs, and desires. And ultimately, we want to be led by the Holy Spirit. So those are the traits of wholeness, the traits we're striving for. Maybe a lifelong journey. We touched on pretty much most of those throughout this series over the past 3 years. It's been quite a ride. And so now we will get into the question of the day. Question, why does God allow suffering? Why does God allow suffering? And so first, let's analyze the question. Why does God allow suffering? A lot of people ask this question. So the first thing to ask is, why shouldn't God allow suffering? So in the question itself is an assumption. So when we say, why does God allow suffering? The assumption in the question is that suffering is bad. And the assumption is that God shouldn't allow it. So there's a judgment and an assumption baked into the question. Because if I asked, why does God allow people to eat pineapple on their pizza? You would say, oh, that's a weird question. If I said, why does God allow people to eat pineapple on pizza? You would say, well, why wouldn't he? Why would you even ask that question? So the implication is that I would believe that they shouldn't. So in that question is an implication that they shouldn't. So by default that God shouldn't allow it, and that it's not okay unless there's some reason. So the implication is it's not okay for him to do it unless there's some reason. But then the question is, well, says who? Says who that he shouldn't allow evil? So God's ultimate goal, so our society sort of thinks that our ultimate goal is to be happy. Our ultimate goal is to be happy. And the question is that God's ultimate goal for us to be happy? And so, if you love your spouse and your spouse said, hey, I want to spend all of our money and all of our savings on these 100 pairs of shoes, and that will make me happy. And is it, because you love your spouse, should you let them buy all the pairs of shoes and that? And they said, well, what if they said they would be suffering if they didn't get them? You know, is the loving thing to do to let them buy it all? You know, so should you forego your family's future so they'll be happy today? Should you forego your family's future so they'll be happy today? So it's happiness. Is that a goal? So is happiness the measure of God's goodness? It's sort of the question. So it's not. So that's the first look at the question. Why should God allow suffering? The second look at, or any comments on that?
It's a very good point.
Oh yeah. Oh, I think she's done, John.
No, I think Sister Angel wanted to say something. Please, Sister Angel, you go ahead. I already stole a verse from it.
Oh, she said it's a good point.
Ah, okay. Okay. I believe there is also the assumption that because God is good,
Right.
why would He allow bad things? And then comes the whole question of whether He's actually all merciful or all powerful.
Oh, yes.
Say.
Yeah. That's and that's what we're gonna get into. Yeah. So that assumption is, you know, if He's good, why would He let me be unhappy? And so then the question is, if your spouse wanted to spend all your money on shoes to be happy, if you were a loving spouse, would you let them do it? You know, are you not? You know, are you being good to let them do it? Or are you being good? You know, are you being good? Are you, if they're going to suffer because they don't get to buy all the shoes? Are you being, you know, does that mean you're not good because you didn't let them do it, or because they're suffering? You had the ability to impact it, and now they're suffering. So welcome, Ashley. Welcome. How good to see you. Let's see. We are studying why does God allow suffering? Why does God allow suffering? Let's see. Welcome to join us. Let's see. A quick. How'd you find out about us, Ashley? I'll ask you real quick. You're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I found it on Google.
Oh, okay. All right, great. Well, welcome. So we're looking at the topic, why does God, so you're welcome to ask questions or comments as you feel along, or just listen along. I'll be presenting a lesson, and you can listen, comment, and welcome. Good to have you. Why does God allow suffering is what we're talking about.
Mike, I was going to say that God allows suffering, but the Holy Spirit lets you look past the suffering, gives you something to look forward to. Whereas people that don't have the Holy Spirit, they don't know what happens after death. And so I think the believer can live through the suffering or survive through it and look past it because there's something hope in the future. Whereas non-believers, they don't know what comes after death.
Okay. So we can experience the suffering difference, or we can tolerate it being a Christian, right? Yeah. And we have a hope. Having hope definitely can help get you through tough situations. You know, they've seen that, like even in concentration camps and things, that having hope can help get you through. So we're looking at the question, why does God allow suffering? So then we get to the part, allow. What does that mean? God allowed it. So what does it mean when people say God allowed something? Anybody, what does that usually mean? Because a lot of times that's kind of one of my pet peeves is when you're discussing something and you say, hey, did God do that? And they say, well, He allowed it. What does that mean when they say God allowed it?
I think it means that He let it happen.
Right. Yeah.
No, probably. I want to be careful here, but probably have an active role in it happening, but at the very least, he let it happen.
Right. Okay. Yeah. 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 That's good. That's good. Yeah. Because they allowed to have. So if I said, "Hey, I heard that pastor cheated on his wife," and then someone comments, "Well, God allowed it." It's like, well, what is that? What are you saying? What does that mean? And so when they say God allow it, yeah. So like John. So usually, I guess they're saying that God knew that it was going to happen. He had the power to prevent it, but he chose not to. So that's how I interpret it. God allowed it. But it doesn't speak to, kind of as John alluded to, it doesn't, it leaves unsaid the cause, whether he caused it or whether he wanted it to happen. And so a lot of times in a lot of conversations, it's kind of it's not really useful comment. So it says he knew about it, but he didn't stop it. But it doesn't necessarily say that he caused it or that he wanted it to happen. So God allowed it. And then we look at, so why does God allow suffering? So what is the word? The word suffering. So the word suffering means it's a state of undergoing pain, distress, and hardship. And so the thing about suffering is that it's subjective. So if you go to the doctor, and if you have a pain, the doctor say, well, how bad will you say the pain is on a scale of 1 to 10? So one person may say it's a 10, but for that same level of pain, someone else may say it's a 7. And so the amount of suffering or whether or not you are suffering is sort of subjective. It depends on your perspective. Has anyone heard the term first world problems?
I think I've heard it. I don't
Okay.
really know anything about it, but I've heard of it.
Okay, so first world problems are usually, people talk about the fact that a lot of times in America we complain about things that other people wish they had. We're complaining about things that other people wish they had. For example, let's say it was this super rich kid, a super rich billionaire family, and the teenage son, for his birthday, his dad bought him this $18 million Bugatti. They were just super rich in oil. He bought him an $18 million Bugatti for his birthday. But the boy wanted chrome rims, and he got black rims. He got the black rims. Those weren't the rims he wanted. And so therefore, he just had a fit. He was crying and screaming. He cursed his dad out. He was on the floor. He threw a tantrum. Is he suffering?
Poor boy. I feel it for him.
You feel for him. I know. I know. He had to take those black rims. So is he suffering? He feels like he's suffering. So from his point of view, he's suffering, but why would God allow him to suffer? Why would God allow that boy to suffer? Why would he allow him to get the black rims instead of the chrome rims? Why would God allow that? And so suffering is subjective. Suffering is subjective. And so, two people can be working in the same place. One person is smiling and whistling every day, and the other person is complaining and negative and complaining about the job. But they're doing the exact same job, and they're in the exact same state of life. And one person is complaining and suffering, but the other person is happy. So why would God allow that person to suffer? So we see that it's not, when we say why would God allow to suffer, it's like, well, sometimes the suffering is subjective. It's based on your mindset. What if, your brother is a drug addict and he says he's suffering because he can't get drugs? And will you sacrifice your finances in order to give him money to buy drugs? So you have the ability to alleviate his suffering. If you love him, would you alleviate the suffering? Why are you going to let him suffer? So suffering is subjective. Suffering is subjective. What we may call suffering, we're defining something as suffering, but either God or someone else may not define that as suffering. So suffering sometimes could be based on your mindset. Your mindset. You decided I was suffering. I didn't get the chrome rims on my $18 million car, so I'm suffering. You didn't let me get the drugs, so I'm suffering. And so suffering could be based on our mindset. And then as John mentioned, there's also a suffering for Christ. There's a concept of suffering for Christ. First, Chris, you have 1 Peter 4, 1 through 2.
Yeah, I didn't have the right 4, 1 through 2. Let me find it real quick. You can hear me, right?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Okay. 1 Peter 4. That's what okay. Got it right here. Therefore, since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourself also with the same attitude, because he who has suffered in his body is done with sin. As the result, he does not live the rest of his earthly life for evil human desires, but rather for the will of God.
Right. So if we're living for the will of God, then we're foregoing our worldly desires. So suffering in that sense, and then also there's potential persecution. So we're suffering for Christ. So there's just kind of examining the question, why does God allow suffering? And looking at the fact that in some areas we're called to actually suffer. Any thoughts so far? So we haven't answered the question yet, but we're analyzing it. We're analyzing the question so far.
Brother Michael, of course, suffering is subjective, right? As we're explaining, and yet it's very real. For the sufferer, right?
Yeah.
However subjective it might be, it is still painful for me that I was diagnosed with a disease, or that I lost my job unfairly, or whatever that might be. Does the fact that suffering is subjective, does it make it less hard? I mean, what is
it does not make it less hard, because you view it as you view it, and it's not necessarily wrong. I mean, and it's hard to say whether it's wrong or not. Is it wrong for the guy to feel he's suffering because he didn't get the color rims he wanted on his $18 million car? Or could we say he's wrong for thinking he's suffering? Most people would maybe say that he's wrong for saying it. So in some sense, yeah, it's wrong. But you are suffering it, regardless of whether you are still experiencing it. And so I guess the thought is kind of more in the sense of whether or not there's an obligation for God to stop your suffering. You have to take in a perspective from his perspective. Is like if someone is good, would they stop you from suffering? You have to take into the count. If your brother is going to harm himself, but he feels he's suffering because you won't give him what he wants, you're being loving by not giving him the money for the drugs. Although he thinks it's suffering, the loving act is to let him suffer. The loving act is to let him suffer. So I guess that's kind of the implication I was getting at, but I didn't actually say it. So whether it's wrong or right to let somebody suffer is not directly obvious. It's not as directly obvious as some would like to argue. That just because you are good, you wouldn't allow someone to suffer isn't necessarily the case.
Thank you, brother.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, thanks for the question. And then, so now we'll talk about preventing suffering. So a lot of times when people ask the question, why does God allow suffering? The reason that they want to know is really because they wanted to answer. They want the answer to the question, how can I keep from suffering, or how can I end my suffering? It's like, I don't really care why God allows it. I just want to know, what can I do to stop it? What can I do to stop my suffering, my family's suffering? And so it's like, I want to know, if I know why God allows it, then I can know maybe how to stop it. And so why does God allow me suffering? You know, if I do everything right, will that prevent me from suffering? If I'm a good person, will that prevent me from suffering? If I follow Jesus, if I do good works, if I have faith, will that prevent me from suffering? You know, and a lot of times it's because I want to be able to control the future. You know, how can I control the future? How can I play a role in what happens to me? How can I make sure bad things don't happen to me? You know, maybe if I pray, I can control the future. If I have faith, if I give money to church, then I can control the future. If I do good things, if I bind the devil, then I can stop bad things from happening. If I confess my sins and I do Hail Marys, then I can stop bad things from happening. If I have a relationship with God, if I can become more self-aware and find my true self, then all my relationships will be better. It's like, oh, maybe if I manifest, I can control the future. If I do ask some positive affirmations or magic spells or blood oaths or align with the right spirits, then maybe I won't suffer. If I had enough money, then I can control my future. If I get in a room with the right people, if I get the right people to listen to me, if I get a good education, then I can control my future. Or maybe if I stay fit, if I eat right, if I take my vitamins, I can control the future. Or if I call Miss Cleo on the psychic hotline, then I can figure out the future. And so a lot of times we have a strong desire to come up with a formula for the mysteries in life. And so we're just kind of looking at the reasons why people ask these questions, why are people asking these questions, and kind of looking at ourselves, you know, why do we want to know the answer to the question? Any thoughts so far? Any thoughts on that? Preventing suffering. Okay. All right, so now we'll look at some of the reasons that are given. So we'll look at some of the theological reasons. So like why the Bible scholars, some different Bible scholars, different denominations say we have suffering, and some philosophical reasons people give for why they're suffering. You know, why is there suffering? Why is there sin in the world? Why does evil exist? You know, so it's kind of similar answer to a lot of these questions. And so now we'll look at it. And kind of John mentioned that, you know, I kind of, after looking at a bunch of these, I kind of think that there's 4 different things that are addressed here in terms of God. You know, God allowing suffering, allowing sin, allowing evil, the 4 different questions. And as far as God doing it, 4 different questions we ask. 1, did God know about it? Was he knowledgeable of it? Did he know it was going to happen? The second one was, did he have the power to prevent it? Does God have the power to prevent it? Third question is, did God cause it? Did God cause it? And then the 4th question is, was it God's will? Did God want it to happen? And so those are, you know, much different scenarios depending on your answer. So if you say God knew about it and he wanted it to happen, that's different than you say God knew about it and he had the power to stop it, but he didn't cause it. God didn't cause it. You know, when you say allowed it, it's kind of the assumption, oh, well, you're saying he didn't cause it. So whether you believe, so the different beliefs have basically different answers to those 4 questions. Did God know about it? Did he have the power to do anything about it? Did he cause it? And did he want it to happen? And so a lot of atheists will argue, well, hey, you got an all-knowing and all-powerful God. You know, there can't be an all-knowing and all-powerful God if there's still suffering. Why would an all-knowing and all-powerful God allow suffering? And so we kind of address those, because it depends on what you call suffering and why, does being good mean I'm going to stop your suffering in every situation? Does being good mean I'm etc. But so we'll look at the different reasons that we have for suffering and evil and sin being in the world. So the first, and there's some of them conflict with each other. A lot of them, we probably have heard in our churches, multiple of them to get together, and a couple of them will conflict. But so the first reason is that we live in a fallen world. We live in a fallen world. Evil exists because we have a fallen world. Who has Romans 5:12?
I do.
Okay.
Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all people because all sinned.
All right. So Adam and Eve sinned. They committed the first sin, and they brought death into the world. And so therefore we are all born with a sin nature. So the world is fallen right now, it will eventually get cleaned up. But right now, the world is fallen. We are all born with a sinful nature because of Adam and Eve. So, because of Adam and Eve is why sin is in the world, is why evil is in the world. So that is one theological viewpoint. Well, that is one biblical truth. The second view that people have is that a lot of people, God versus Satan. So a lot of people view the world, the universe, as a cosmic battle between God and Satan. So God is doing everything good and Satan is doing everything evil. So it's God versus Satan. God is doing everything good and Satan is doing everything evil. So everything evil, all of the suffering, all of the sin is caused by Satan. It's caused by Satan. So that's another theological view that it's all caused by Satan. Another view is that it's caused by faith or a lack of faith. So you're suffering because you have a lack of faith. If you had enough faith, God would answer your prayers. If you had enough faith, you could present suffering. And there's some denominations, if you have enough faith, you can heal everyone that's sick. If you had enough faith, you can get material wealth. If you have enough faith, you can cast out demons and bind Satan. If you have enough faith, you can raise the dead. And so it's amen. So Ashley says amen. So it's a lack of faith that causes your suffering. So a lot of denominations focus on the faith. If you have enough faith, so you're suffering because you don't have enough faith, or this evil exists because you don't have enough faith. And if you had enough faith, then you could change things. You can overcome evil. And so that's another perspective. And so it's not necessarily one or the other of these. And so actually, all of these so far have truth to them, are truth in some. And then there's the sovereignty of God view. The sovereignty of God view. So the sovereignty of God view says that God is sovereign. God is all-knowing and all-powerful, and everyone would say yes. But the sovereignty of God view basically says that everything is caused by God. God, determined every hair on your head. He predestined everything before the creation of the earth. Everything was designed by God, the God of the universe, and created by God. And therefore, that includes evil. So anything that happened is preordained by God, and anything that happened was ultimately caused by God. So the pure sovereignty of God view says God caused everything. And so that's a view that, the Reformed, the Calvinists, the Lutherans take, that God caused everything. Who has Romans 3:5?
That's me.
Okay.
Sorry, let me get back to my page here. But if our unrighteousness brings out God's righteousness more clearly, what shall we say? That God is unjust in bringing his wrath on us? And it says, I'm using a human argument.
Yeah. Actually, I have a better verse for that point of view later, but you get the point of view. The point of view is that God. So I guess any comments so far? Fallen world, God versus Satan, faith, sovereignty of God. Okay.
All makes sense.
All makes sense? Okay. So then there's more. So the other thought, the other angle in this is the works doctrine. And so a lot of these doctrines, some are explicitly spoken in the pulpit and some are not. Some are, but you believe them and you hear them, but they're implied. So a lot of times they're implied, or either we believe them. So another one is the works doctrine. So the works doctrine says you're suffering because you've sinned. Basically, God is punishing you for your sin. That was the view that Job's friends had. In the story of Job, Job suffered. Job's friend was saying, hey, you must have had some secret sin. So the works doctrine says that you are suffering because you've sinned. So it's a result of your sinning. In the world, they call it karma. You're suffering. So the works doctrine says you're suffering because you sin. And a lot of times, whether we admit it or not, we think that something bad happens. It's like, oh man, maybe it's because I did this or I did that. So the works doctrine says you're suffering because of bad things happen because of your sin. Another, comments? No? Okay. So the next concept, theological, I guess you can call it theological context, is time and chance. Who has Ecclesiastes 9:11? 9:11.
I think that's me again. 1 second.
Okay. Ecclesiastes 9:11.
I have seen something else under the sun. The race is not to the swift, or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise or wealth. Nor does food come to the wise or wealth to the brilliant, or favor to the learned, but time and chance happen to them all.
All right. So it's saying you may have people trained in war and warriors, and they should win the fight, but they don't always win the fight. Sometimes people will be wealthy, but they may still go hungry. Sometimes maybe are really skilled at something, but they may not win. It's saying time and chance happen to us all. So it's just basically saying, well, sometimes stuff just happens. Sometimes stuff just happens. Bad things just happen. So that's another concept. Time and chance happeneth to us all. The other concept is free will. Free will. So God gave us the ability to make a choice. So that means we have the ability to make bad choices. And it also means that other people have the ability to make bad choices. So we have the ability to make bad choices. We may suffer from it. Other people have the ability to make bad choices, and we may suffer from those because it's free will. God doesn't necessarily designate everything we do. He allows us to choose. We can choose good or choose evil. And every day we have to choose. Basically, every day we choose the tree of life or the tree of good and evil. And it's up to us to make that choice. And there's going to be consequences when we choose evil. Consequences to us, consequences to people around us, consequences to the world for us making the wrong choice. And then lastly, there's the concept, which there isn't, I don't think there's an actual Bible verse for it. So this is just a concept that other people have of order and chaos. So some people believe that you need both good and evil to have a balance, in the world, kind of the yin and yang that people talk about. You need both chaos and evil. So those are kind of the major concepts to why suffering exists. Those are the major concepts to why suffering exists. And let's see, any thoughts on those? So we're going to dive into a few of the areas. I'm not going to we're going to dive into, well, anyway, just any thoughts on those?
Brother Michael, all of these explanations make me think how important this is for people, for us, for human beings, to try to make sense of suffering, right? Whether it's something that God allows, or it's just chaos and order, or yin and yang, whatever that might be. It's so important to us that we try to make sense of it somehow, just to have some order in our minds, and peace in our hearts.
Yeah. And it's a huge thing. It's with Christian and non-Christians all, like, this is like a huge part of basically how well you enjoy life, whether you even think life is worth living, is your perception on this question, a lot of people's perception on this question. And it also impacts the degree to which you suffer. Because the reason you think you're suffering impacts how much the suffering impacts you. Like you mentioned, if you have hope, or Chris mentioned, if you have hope, or even if you think you're suffering as a result of something, even look at the situation where it's like, oh, I'm getting older. I may wake up in the morning and I have a pain. In my arm. It's like, oh man, I got pain in my arm. I'm getting older, and then it's like I may just feel sad about it. But then 3 days later, I wake up and there's a pain in my arm, but I went to the gym the day before and I had a rough workout and I got a pain in my arm, and I'm kind of like, yeah, that's right. I got, because it's working. And so it's the same pain, the same degree of pain, but my view of it changes based on whether I think it's for my good, or whether I think it's if it gives me a dim look at the future, if it makes me feel like I have a hopeless future, or if it makes me think, oh yeah, that pain is there because I did something to cause that pain, because it's going to help me out. So your view on that really impacts, your life, a lot. So your view on suffering, it has a big impact on your life. All right, so now we'll look at some practical views. Take some stances on the issues. So the reason, in some senses, we want to, it's good to understand the cause, and then in the other sense, it's more practical to understand what I can do about it. So we'll kind of look at the practical senses, and so we'll look the fact that so some of those thoughts are in conflict with each other. Some of those scenarios you can't have both. You can't if either God caused everything or He didn't. It's like some of those are in conflict with each other. And so we'll take some stances on them, and so the Bible is clear. I feel that we have some agency in our lives. Some agency meaning that we have some role to play, we have some responsibility, we have some things we can do to affect the consequences that happen. Throughout the Bible God says, if you do this, then this will happen. If you do this, then this will happen. So I believe it's clear that we have some role to play in what happens. We have some role to play in it. And so one view, so there's different, but there's still multiple reasons why suffering happens, why bad things happen. So the first reason is Satan. So we have Satan, fallen angels, demons, all of that nature. So that's one reason that bad things happen. So who has 1 Peter 5, 8 through 9?
I think that's me again.
Okay.
Just lost it. Oh, there we go. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of sufferings.
All right. So it tells us to resist the devil. So it tells us to take some action in order to have some agency in terms of what the consequences are. So it tells us to resist the devil. So the devil is a factor in our suffering. The devil is a factor in evil. So we saw him in Garden of Eden. We saw him in Job. That was one of the problems Job suffered, is because the only options they had were either is because you sinned or it's because God messed up. They didn't realize, okay, hey, there's a devil involved in this story too. They didn't get to read the beginning of the first chapter. They got thrown in the middle of the chapter. And so they didn't know that Satan was involved. So we know the Bible tells us that Satan is involved, and that is one of the reasons we suffer. We saw that in the book of Job. We saw that even when Jesus got led into the wilderness in Matthew 4:1, it says Jesus was led so we know that Satan is involved, but then we also see in a few places that there are some nuances to it. So like in Job 4:1, it says, then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. So we know that Jesus was tempted by Satan in the wilderness. And so, a lot of, you hear preach a lot, Satan waited for Jesus to be hungry, he's fasting, and then he tried to jump on him when he was weak. But Matthew 4:1 tells us then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. So he was led into the wilderness not to fast, not to find berries, but he was led into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. That was to prepare him to start his mission. And then who has Luke 22, 31 to 32?
I do.
Okay.
Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat. But I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. Okay.
So it's Jesus tells Peter here that Satan has asked permission, or he's demanded permission. So it's interesting. He demanded it, but what he demanded was permission. Like, let me. So he demanded permission to sift Peter like wheat. And so in the book of Job, Satan asked permission to. So we know that Satan is the cause of it, but it's not like there's an equal to God. And, Satan is off doing one thing, God is doing another. So God, you have the allow permit. But the Bible tells us to resist Satan. The Bible tells us that Satan is prowling like a lion. So the Bible tells us that Satan is clearly our enemy. And it tells us that we need to take some active part in combating him, or in resisting the suffering that he would cause. So it says resist the enemy. And Paul gives us in Ephesians 6 the armor of God: truthfulness, righteousness, the gospel, faith, hope of salvation, the Bible, following the lead of the Holy Spirit. So we have things. So the devil is one of the reasons for suffering. And there are things that we can do that the Bible gives us to prevent the devil from calling, to resist the devil if we put on the armor of God. So one of the reasons we suffer is because of the devil. Any thoughts? Any thoughts on that?
This also reminds me of the verse that says that we are not in war with
Flesh and blood.
but right?
Right.
But how is that verse, brother?
We don't battle flesh and blood, but is that Ephesians 6 as well?
Qualities and powers, yeah.
Powers, the principalities of the air. Yeah, Ephesians 6. And yeah, and that's yeah, so we aren't battling flesh and blood. So Paul is saying that our fight is a spiritual battle, the powers and principalities of the air. So we have a spiritual war going on. So we need to be mindful of that. So part of the reason that we're suffering is because there's a spiritual warfare going on, and we have a spiritual enemy. So that is part of the reason that we suffer. We have a spiritual warfare with a spiritual enemy. And the Bible gives us specifics that we need to resist that and we need to fight it. So whether or not you say God allowed it or God permitted it, whatever, the practical stance is that the Bible tells us that Satan is our enemy and we need to resist him and fight against him. So that's the first cause of the suffering. Another cause of suffering is you reap what you sow. You reap what you sow. Who has Matthew? Oh, I have it. Matthew 26:52. This is when, after the Lord's Supper, they were, where were they? In the garden. He told them to all bring their swords. It says, then Jesus told him, put your sword back in its place, for all those who take up the sword will perish by the sword. And some versions say, if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. So the implication is that the method of living that you choose has some impact on the experience of the life you live. So if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. So if you live by the sword, if you're constantly antagonizing people, cursing everybody out, then you're going to get punched more than some other people. It's sowing and reaping. It's you live by the sword, you die by the sword. So your actions played a part in it. So if the example I always use is if you got a bag full of rocks and you throw them up in the air, and 10 seconds later a rock hits you on the head, you can't yell out, hey, God, why did you hit me with a rock? Or you can't yell out, hey, Satan is I bind you, Satan. It's like, no, you threw rocks in the air, you get hit in the head with rocks. That's just a natural consequence. So sowing and reaping is a natural consequence of your actions. So you chose an action, there's a natural consequence to it. There was no supernatural involvement in it. There's a natural reaction, there's a natural consequence to some of the actions that we choose to take. You got $1,000, you leave it on your car seat with your windows down at the mall. Somebody steals it, it's not God punishing you. It's just, you made a bad choice. So sometimes there's sowing and reaping. There's natural consequences to some of our decisions, and that can cause us to suffer. So that's another one of the reasons that we suffer. And so if we read the book of Proverbs, we'll get wisdom to prevent us from suffering from natural consequences. Any thoughts on that? No? Okay. So another reason we suffer at the practical level is that exactly. Is that people are evil. Some people are evil. People are evil and people have free will. Who have Psalms 10:1 through 4? Who has Psalms 10:1 through 4?
I was
Welcome.
on mute again, sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Why, Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? In his arrogance, the wicked man hunts down the weak, who are caught in the schemes he devises.
All right. So there's wicked people in the
Oh,
world.
sorry,
Oh,
I'm sorry, that was 1 through 4. I didn't finish it. He boasts about the cravings of the heart. He blesses the greedy and reviles the Lord. In his pride, the wicked man does not seek him. In all his thoughts, there is no room for God.
all right. So there's wickedness in the world. There are wicked people. So that is a factor in why we suffer. That is a factor in why we suffer. And then, one may ask, well, why doesn't God get rid of all the evil people? Why does God get rid of all the people that sin? It's like, well, then none of us would be able to be on this call. Be quiet. Be quiet on the line. John, you got John? 1 John 1:10.
I do. If we claim we have not sinned, we make him out to be a liar, and his word is not in us.
All right, so we've all sinned. We've all done some evil. So if God got rid of the evil people, well, he will eventually. He will eventually, but be quiet. Welcome, Kenneth. Welcome, Kenneth. We're looking at why does God allow suffering? Why does God allow suffering? And practical reasons we've looked at is caused by Satan. You reap what you sow. People are evil. The next reason is that we perceive it to be bad. So we sort of talked about this, but we judge something to be bad, or we judge something to be evil, or we judge some situation to be suffering. So another example is, you may have a 4-year-old kid. The 4-year-old kid, loves to play video games. You realize he's up half hour past his bedtime. You go and tell him to go to bed, but he's on another level. He's never got to this level before. He's having so much fun, but you make him go to bed, and now he's crying and screaming and yelling. Or, the next morning he wants to eat cake for breakfast. He wants to eat cake for breakfast every day, and you don't let him. He's crying, he's screaming. Why are you making him suffer? Why are you allowing him to suffer? He's suffering. He's suffering. He's sad. He feels horrible about it. Why are you making him suffer? And so so another reason we suffer is we perceive something as suffering. It could be our mindset. Our mindset sometimes. We perceive it as suffering. Any thoughts? Okay. And then the final reason we suffer, which we'll get into deeper, is that it was initiated by God. So sometimes it's initiated by God. So it's not always initiated by God, but sometimes it's initiated by God. So we looked at the fact that sometimes it's Satan causes us to suffer. Sometimes it's a natural consequences of our actions. We reap what we sow. We did something, and it's a natural consequence of it. Free will. People are evil is a reason that we suffer. You perceive it to be bad, and then the final reason is there are situations where God initiates your suffering. That God initiates your suffering. So it's not every case that God initiated, but there are cases, and we're going to dig deep into those. So who has Isaiah 45, 6-7?
It's Isaiah 45. Am I right, brother? No.
Yes, 45.
Okay, good. That they may know from the rising of the sun and from the west that there is none beside me. I am the Lord, and there is none else. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things.
All right. So the Lord does all of those things. So that would have been a better verse for the sovereignty of God standpoint. But so God sometimes initiates your suffering. And so we'll look at why. So first we'll look at Billy Graham speak on it. Quick video.
That tragedy in your life, that problem in your life, you thought it was a tragedy. You thought it was by accident. It might have been sent by God. Because you see, your body is not so important as your soul or your spirit. Your body is temporary. It's going to go to the grave, but your soul, your spirit will live on forever. And God is interested in saving your spirit. And sometimes He allows your body to suffer in order to bring your spirit to Himself. You see, the Apostle Paul cried out 3 times, Lord, deliver me. God said, no, Paul, but I'll show you what my grace can do. How many of you have problems and tragedy and disappointment in your life? Maybe God sent it like He sent this wind to blow up the storm, to wake you up, to cause you to repent of your sins and turn to God while there's time. That tragedy in your life, that problem in your life.
So there are times when it can be initiated by God. It can be initiated by God. It could be to wake you up. It could be caused by God. And we're going to dig into that. Any thoughts on the video? Any thoughts on the video? Any responses to the video?
Can you see me?
No.
Yeah, I'm trying to get a video. I couldn't see the video.
Oh, could you guys could see the video, right?
I'm having trouble.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we can't see it yet, but that's okay. So some of the reasons that God may initiate suffering is number 1, to strengthen your faith. Number 2, to change you, to prepare you for something, to change your character. Number 3 is revealing your heart, revealing your level of faith to you. Number 4 is He may be withholding something that you want because it will hurt you. So something you think you want, it will be harmful for you. So He's withholding it. And also to get your attention, Those are not necessarily all the scenarios, but those are the ones we're going to discuss. But before we discuss those, I want to talk about a phenomenon called the region beta paradox. Has anybody ever heard of the region beta paradox? I'm going to mute you, Kenneth. Okay. So it's actually I guess it's sort of a psychological phenomenon, but so I live 15-minute walk from the Santa Clara Caltrain station. So there's a train station. I could walk there in 15 minutes. I could drive there in about 2 minutes, and I'd have to pay for parking. And so 15 minutes is pretty close. So it takes me about 15-minute walk to walk there. The Dearden station in downtown San Jose, that would be too far for me to walk. But I could drive there in about 10 minutes. And so the interesting thing is that even though the Dearden station is further, I'll get there sooner than I will get to the Santa Clara station. Because there's a certain distance that would be too far to walk, then I would decide to drive. So the region beta paradox basically says, there's some point at which situations will get so bad that you'll have to do something else, which may end up putting you in a better situation than the original situation. So because the situation got worse, things actually got better for you. So because the San Jose station is further, I actually get there quicker and I actually have more time because it's further. So, and that's true in a lot of areas in life. So let's say, for instance, you got a job. You've been on it for 10 years. You've been complaining every day. You got a horrible boss, but he's not horrible enough for you to leave. But if he was more horrible, if the situation got worse, if it was really toxic, then you leave and find a better job. It's like you don't go to something better because it's not bad enough. It's not bad enough for you to do something better. It's not bad enough for you to take action. So sometimes a situation getting worse causes you to get into a better situation. So that's the region beta paradox. And so I know, for instance, I used to never exercise. I would only eat fast food. I didn't worry about what I ate. I ate fast food, and then, but I started having health problems. My eyes. I started a problem with my eyes. I started having to urinate frequently. I had issues, but it wasn't that bad. I got some glasses, but it wasn't until one point I went to the hospital, and they wouldn't let me leave. I went for a checkup, and they wouldn't let me leave because my blood sugar was so high. And then I found out, oh, okay, I got diabetes, and so then I realized, okay, so then after that, they put me on medicine. So then I was like, I went to the gym. I started going to the gym 4 or 5 times a week. I lost weight, so it was because things got bad enough that then, I got healthier. I started eating healthier. If things didn't get bad, I would not have changed. But so sometimes it's like it takes things getting worse in order for things to get better. If you don't suffer, then you'll never get out of the situation you're in. So sometimes you got to suffer in order to change, to get out of the situation. So sometimes things have to get better for them to improve. That's the region beta paradox.
Get better or get worse?
Get worse. Things have to get worse in order for you to make the change to make it better. Has anybody experienced that?
Yeah, because that happens often with people who are addicted to something. They can't get out, they can't quit. But it's like, well, once you've had enough, you'll change. You'll do something different. Or it's like you haven't hit rock bottom yet.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. They call that rock bottom. When you hit rock bottom. Yeah. It hasn't got bad. Yeah, rock bottom is when it gets bad enough. You're at your worst point.
Yeah.
And then you decide to change. Yeah. Yeah, it's a common occurrence. So let's look at. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was saying, I've certainly experienced that as well, but I'm glad to know there's a name for it now. The something dilemma. What was the name of that again?
Region, REGEION, beta paradox. And I think the region is based on, like, the first example, the geographic thing. If it's something that's too far, then you'll do, you'll take some other method. Region beta.
And I'm currently in that region beta thing at work right now, so yeah, I get it.
Yes.
I get it.
Yeah, I get it too.
What was it? Region beta what?
Paradox.
Oh, paradox.
Let me go ahead and share the region beta. I guess I could put it in the chat.
No, I can't. I don't have a chat.
Oh, you don't have a chat? Oh, okay. Well, you see it on these. You see the screen?
It's just no, I don't see the full screen. It's just the outline of the screen.
Oh, okay. Well, region beta paradox, yeah. All right. So let's look at the first scenario where God may have caused you to suffer. So the first scenario is that he's making you into what he wants you to be. And so this is often many people refer to this as the wilderness. So you're going through the wilderness. So who has James 1:2-4?
I have that one. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything.
All right. So the testing of your faith makes you mature and complete. So sometimes we go through the wilderness. So Jesus, he went into the wilderness before he started his ministry to be tempted by the devil. The Israelites went into the wilderness for 40. So Jesus went into the wilderness for 40 days to be tempted, to be prepared for his ministry. The children of Israel, Israelites, went into the wilderness for 40 years. For 40 years to prepare them to get into the promised land. And so we see 40 as the number of the wilderness. So Noah was on the boat, and the earth, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights to cleanse it, to prepare it. Pregnancy, 40 weeks to birth a new thing. So sometimes we go through the wilderness. Sometimes we go through the wilderness in order to change us, in order to prepare us for the new. Prepare us for the new. And so we have to go through something. There's one psychological term called exposure therapy they use in psychology. If you have a fear, like fear of going outside, they basically slowly expose you to something, and they found that as you don't actually become less afraid, your fear stays the same, but you become braver. You become braver. So when you go, the going through it makes you braver. And it's the same as if you know about the caterpillar. A caterpillar is a little worm that gets put into a cocoon. It gets put into a cocoon, and then it eventually has to struggle and push against the shell and force its way out and struggle for a period of time, and eventually it breaks out and becomes a butterfly. But the thing is if you want to help it out and you cut the cocoon open, he won't be able to fly, because it was the struggle of getting out of the cocoon that made his wings strong enough for him to fly. So a lot of times we want the suffering to decrease, but we're actually being strengthened, turning us into something else. It's giving us capabilities that we didn't even know about before, but it was going through the struggle that allowed it, going through the struggle that prepared us, that changed us into what we needed to be in the next level. The next place we were headed, we had to become a different person, basically, in order to face the next level that we were going to. So that's sometimes why God will cause the struggle.
That's a good one.
Oh, thank you.
Help your kids too much.
Say it again.
I was just thinking that's a very good statement and analysis for parents who help their children too much.
Oh, yeah.
They don't get to struggle.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's a good point.
Entitled, and then they can't face situations that happen to them in their lives.
Yeah, that was one of the points I saw in that last lesson, Forgiving Your Parents, that psychologists were saying that one of the role of a parent is to prepare your children to face the world. And so like allowing you to suffer or not suffer, but it's like sometimes if you do everything for them, then you're doing them a disservice, because you're not preparing them to face the world.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, obviously you can go too far on the other side. You don't want to be negligent, but so there's a balance. But the child only sees it from the perspective of, I just want the good. I want it easy. And so sometimes we're the child. Sometimes we're the child in life. Yeah, and then here's a video.
In the Bible story,
The children of Israel left Egypt, traveled through the desert for 40 years, and eventually reached the promised land. When they got there, they realized there were giants there that they had to defeat before they could enter. Many of you are trying to achieve a goal. You're trying to have a breakthrough. You're trying to reach to a next level, but you're finding out there are more challenges, there are more tribulation, there are more struggles, there are more trials that you're going through, and it seems to be getting worse. There's more warfare. But what I want to let you know is that the giants weren't a sign that the Israelites were leaving Egypt. The giants were a sign that they were about to enter into the promised land. So the fact that it's getting worse, the fact that the warfare is increasing, may be a sign that you're almost there. So don't stop. Keep going. The giants were a sign that they were about to enter into the promised land. You're almost there. Alrighty. So the other reason that God may do it is to strengthen your faith. Strengthen your faith. Who has 1 Peter 1, 6-7?
I do. In all this you greatly rejoice, though now, for a little while, you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. So some of the trials may have been to refine your faith, to strengthen your faith. Because you know, a lot of us have experienced that when you go through something, then and God gets you through it, if you have to go through it again, you have a bit more faith in it. Like I've been laid off 3 times. The first time I was a nervous wreck, but then God got me through it. So by the 3rd time, it was like, oh, I've been here before. God's gonna take care of me. God's gonna take care of me because it was the same struggle, the same situation, but the fact that I had my faith tested in that area before, I was able to handle it better because I knew I had faith that God would get me through it, so I didn't suffer as much. I didn't have as much suffering. I was in the same situation, but I wasn't suffering because my faith had been strengthened, even though I was in the exact same situation. So sometimes it's to strengthen your faith, to strengthen your faith. And so there's...
So that was an answer to what question?
That was one of the reasons why God will cause the suffering.
Oh, okay.
So we're looking at scenarios where God will cause the suffering. There's a faith video. I don't know if this really fits, but it's here. So we'll go ahead. Fireproof faith. Fireproof faith. There's a delivering faith and there's a sustaining faith. Delivering faith is when God answers your prayer and gives you exactly what you ask for. It's when you're cured of that disease. It's when you find that perfect job. It's when you find that spouse. It's Abraham and Sarai having a child at their old age. It's the armies of David defeating the enemy. Sustaining the faith is when you don't get exactly what you ask for, but God gets you through it anyway. It's when you don't get cured of cancer, but you get a calm and a peace about you that lets you get through it. It's when you don't find that job, but your finances are taken care of supernaturally. It's Daniel in the lion's den. It's the 3 Hebrew boys being put into the fire. You see, sometimes God will deliver you from the fire, and sometimes he will make you fireproof. Fireproof faith. Happy Veterans Day. Well, fireproof faith. Well, it's not Veterans Day, but yeah. So sometimes God will strengthen your faith by not removing the struggle. He didn't stop Daniel from getting put into the lion's den. He came to him while he was in the lion's den. He didn't stop the Hebrew boys from getting put into the fire. He sustained them through the fire. All right. The next reason that God will, or any thoughts, comments? Okay. The next reason is that God may be revealing your faith to you. So you think you have a certain level of faith. You talk about having a certain level of faith, but God is showing you how much faith you really have. Who has Matthew 26:31 through 35? Going once. Okay, was that the one I had? No, I got the other one. All right, I'll read it. Matthew 26:31 to 35. Then Jesus said to them, so this is when Jesus talking to the disciples, talking to Peter. Jesus said to them, "You will all fall away because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But before I have been raised, I will go ahead of you to Galilee." But Peter replied to him, "Even if they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away." Jesus said to him, "Truly I say to you, that this very night, before a rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, "Even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you." All the disciples said the same thing as well. So I'm sure Peter thought when he said it, that he meant it. He told Jesus that I'm not going to deny you. I'm going to stay by your side. You know, even if it comes to death, I'm here with you. And then when it actually happened, Peter denied him 3 times. Peter denied him 3 times. And so sometimes you go through things just to reveal to you how much faith you really have. I mean, and ultimately, you know, not to embarrass you, but to strengthen your faith. I mean, the ultimate goal is to strengthen your faith. But you have to know where you're at. You have to know where you're really at in order to get where you need to be. I got a lot of my videos in here, huh? All right. So you got to know where you're at. So here's a video about that.
Hello, I went to the mall the other day to meet some people for lunch. I looked at the map and found the food court, but I had no idea where to go. It wasn't until I found a little star that said "You are here," and then I could map a path to get to where I needed to go. It's the same way in life. We can have a clear picture of our goals, a clear picture of where we want to head, but until we have a true understanding of ourselves, we can't actually map a path to get there. In the Bible, there was a story of Peter denying Jesus 3 times, even though he told Jesus that he would never deny him. I'm sure that Peter actually thought that he wouldn't, but it wasn't until his life was threatened that he realized he didn't have as much faith as he thought he did. You see, Satan's tests are to cause us to sin, but sometimes God's tests us not so that he can see how much faith we have, but that he can show us how much faith we have, or how much faith we don't have, or what our faith is truly in. Hello, I went to the mall the other day to meet some people for lunch.
Yeah, so sometimes we go through situations to find out what your faith is really in. Like, you know, when I got laid off, it was like, okay, was my trust in my savings, or was my trust in God? Was my trust in my job, or was my trust in God? And so we find out, okay, what is your trust really in? What is your faith really in? Was my faith in my resume, or was my faith in God? So it reveals what our faith is really in. Sometimes God may withhold a blessing or remove a blessing because it became an idol to us. It became an idol to us, or it would become an idol. If he gave us something, then we would worship it. Maybe we would turn away from God. So maybe he gave you something and you worship the blessing more than you worship God. And so you couldn't handle the blessing if you got it right now. And so you abused the blessing that God gave you. So sometimes we may feel that we're suffering because of God is not giving us something we want. But God knows that if he gave it to us, it would take us further from where he wants us to be. So maybe you want a promotion on your job, but if you got that promotion, you would stop going to church. It would take you further from God. And so sometimes we may not get a blessing we want because it would actually take us further from God if we got it. Any thoughts? All right.
I think it is true sometimes, at least I have been in a situation that I get too comfortable, too happy with the blessing, and I forget the blessing giver.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, we have to be very careful with that. Of course.
Yeah. Do we want the gift or do we want the giver? Sometimes we want the gift more than we want the giver. And then lastly, one of the reasons that God may cause us to suffer is to get our attention, to get us to listen, to get us to listen. So who has Hebrews 12, 9 through 11?
I do. Moreover, we have all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of spirits and live? They disciplined us for a little while as they thought best, but God disciplines us for our good, in order that we may share in his holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it.
All right, so sometimes we get disciplined. Sometimes it's disciplining us, so it's to train us. And here's a video of a deep point. God is getting us to a point where we'll listen.
I always thought the discipline of the Lord was through circumstances. The circumstance, I don't think, is the discipline. The discipline of the Lord is his voice. In John 15, it says about the vine and the branches, and then Jesus says to his disciples, but you have been pruned already. He says, any branch in me that doesn't bear fruit will be cut, put into a fire. And then he turns to his disciples and says, you've been pruned already. The same word that describes this discipline of the Lord, the same word is the word prune. It's actually a cutting that takes place. And he says, you've been pruned already because of the word I've spoken to you. In other words, when I talk to you, that's what disciplines. You say, what about Jonah and the whale? Jonah and the whale just got him to where he would listen. It was the voice of the Lord that changes and transforms. He created the worlds through his word. There's nothing that cannot be done through his word, through his decree. You know, I always thought the discipline of the Lord.
So sometimes the discipline is to get us to a point where we will listen. Get us to a point where we will listen. And that reminds me of Elijah. It was one of the most interesting stories. He was one of the most powerful prophets. He stopped the rain from coming down. He went up against 100 prophets of Baal, called down fire. He was mocking them. The guy was looking to kill him, and he told the king, get your prophets, get my prophets. We're going to battle. And he killed them. It says he killed the 100 prophets of Baal afterwards. And then all of a sudden, Jezebel said she was going to kill him, and he was scared. He ran for his life, and he's hiding behind a tree, and he's like, "Oh God, kill me!" And then, and he was saying, "Oh, just take my life." He was so scared, and then God told him to come outside, and God said, it wasn't like a Moses. Moses, it was like, "Okay, well, I'll get your brother to talk." "Okay, well, I'll give you the stick." "Well, I do this." God said, he said, "Oh, this guy's he's trying to kill me. I'm running, he's trying to kill me." And then God just said, "Yeah, go back to where him and tell him this and this." Okay. He didn't comfort him. He didn't say, he didn't explain why it was going to be okay. and he went from I'm scared of this guy, he's trying to kill me, to yeah, that's great. Now just go back and tell him this and this. It was just the voice of God, just God talking to him, is what encouraged him. He didn't need the pep talk, he didn't need the explanation. Just God showed up and talked to him, and so saying that is So God, when God shows up in our suffering, he can meet us in our suffering. He can meet us in our suffering. So sometimes God will get us to a point where we're listen. We can get too caught up in our day busy, and that we need something to slow us down. Sometimes we need to get slowed down. I know that, in Bible study, I used to go to the Bible study, the singles Bible study, and a large percent of the people that would come, new people, they say they were laid off. So it wasn't until they were laid off that they decided they needed to go to Bible study. When everything was going good, they thought they were doing, they didn't need it. But it was when they got laid off that so sometimes God needs to get our attention. Sometimes God needs to slow us down to get our attention. So you don't want to be in that, you don't want to live a lifestyle that you need God to cause suffering in order for him to get your attention. You want to be able to worship God on the mountaintop and in the valley. So a lot of times, there are a lot of people that will only seek God in the valley. They get closest to God in the valley. And then they wonder why they're suffering. It's like, well, that's the only time you'll talk to God. It's when you're in the valley. So we want to worship God in our suffering. Any thoughts?
It was all really good.
Oh, thank you. Okay. So a couple final points. One is that you can ask God to use your suffering. So if you're going through some suffering, ask God to use it. Because it's like the saying, God didn't cause it, but he can use it. He can use anything for your good. So ask God to use it. If you're in the middle of suffering.
Christ, as I said. So all you have to do, in the midst of any kind of suffering, physical suffering, emotional suffering, mental suffering, moral, any kind, all you have to do is say, Lord, use this. That's it. That's all you have to say is, Father, use this. And he does. I mean, honestly, think of a hangnail. Think of a sliver. Think of the worst thing you can think of. Think of like a heartbreak. That's real. Death. Loss. And in the midst of that to say, okay, Father, I don't want this to happen, but use it. I don't want to have to go through this, but use it. And that's how you and I unite our sufferings to the sufferings of Christ for the sake of his body, the church. Because nothing given to God is ever wasted. So, give it to God. And don't waste it. You're a member of the body of Christ, as I said.
So give God your suffering. Ask God to use it. Ask God to use it to strengthen you. Ask God to use it for your benefit.
Is it for my benefit or for his benefit?
For both.
Okay.
For both. All right, and then last, an encouraging video. Perhaps. Oops. That's not what I want to do. I want to stop the screen.
Parent with
with you guys? There are 3 verses in the Bible that have encouraged me in some of the most darkest seasons of my life. They're found in the first book of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1. It's verse 1, 2, and 3. You know it. It says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was without form or void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light." Before God said, "Let there be light," in verse 2, there was darkness. But also in the second verse of the Bible, it says, "In that darkness, God's Spirit moved." It suggests that no matter how dark your season is, it's not an excuse not to believe that God is moving on your behalf. I don't care how dark it is, He's still moving. The next point is, when life is lifing, specifically the dark seasons in your life are opportunities for you to walk by faith and not by sight. And God leverages our dark times to give us opportunities to exercise one of the most important attributes a believer should have. Because the book of Hebrews teaches us that without faith, it is impossible to please God. And one of the challenges is, even for myself as a believer, is that when I'm going through dark times, I have to remind myself that mine and your verse 3 is on the way. That no matter how dark it is right now, God is getting ready to say, "Let there be light." Can I be transparent with you guys? There are 3.
So God is getting ready to say, "Let there be light. Let there be light." And so we know that we have a brighter future. We have the hope of a brighter future. Romans 8:18. Who has that?
I do. And it reads, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us.
All right. Amen. So our present suffering, whatever we're going through now, it's going to be worth it for the glory that we're going to have in eternity, in heaven, in Jesus, in the new Jerusalem, when all sin is gone, the new heaven and the new earth. Let's walk in the way. Let's seek the truth and live the life. All right. Got a few minutes, so give you one final story. I heard of this this ritual of manhood that I don't know if it's true. I heard Cherokee Indian, but it's some American Indian crowd. They have a ritual of manhood. When you become a man, that you have to go through this ritual. Basically, they will take you, the young boy, into the woods, and you have to stay there blindfolded, sitting in a chair. And the different animals will come, and it's, there's a lot of wild animals out there. There's even bugs that could bite you and kill you, and there's danger, a lot of danger there, but you have to stay there until morning. And if you could stay there until morning, then you're a man. Then you're considered a man, and you can reach your level of manhood in the tribe. And so this one boy, his father took him out into the woods, sat him in a chair, and he sat there with the blindfold on, and he heard the noises, and he heard something ruffling in the bushes, and he was about to take it off and say, "I'm not going to die for this," but he decided to sit there. And so he stayed, and he didn't get any sleep. He was so scared. He heard different sounds going on. He felt, is this moisture on me? What's going on? He didn't know what was going on in his surroundings. And then eventually, he saw light coming, and he saw more light. Eventually he thought it was daylight. And so he lifted up the blindfold, and he had lasted through the night. But then he looked behind him, and he saw his dad sitting behind him with his bow and arrow. And he had stayed there all night. So his dad was behind him, protecting him all night. And so that's how it is for us. It's like, even though we go through suffering, even though we're going through trials, even though we're going through tribulations, God is still with us. We may not be able to see him, we may not be able to hear him, but he's still with us. He's still with us, and he's making sure we don't go through more than we can bear. And so God is still with us and protecting us. Our Father is still guarding us and protecting us.